If your business has been impacted by high interest rates, you're probably looking at the Federal Reserve's recent decision not to change interest rates and asking a question like I received: what the heck are these idiots doing? I've edited the question to keep this a family video. I'm Dr. Bill Connerly. I connect the dots between the economy and business. For those of you interested in interest rates, understanding interest rates means understanding Federal Reserve policy. And by going through the Fed's goals and their sense of how the economy works, we can get to an understanding of the decision they made this month and the decisions that they will make through the rest of 2024 and on into 2025. Federal Reserve policy decisions are made by a committee, 19 people, and every one of them in their speeches makes a reference to the Federal Reserve's goals, and they use the phrase dual mandate. That is, the Federal Reserve Act, the legislation that created it, said that the Fed should keep inflation low and employment high. The way the Fed thinks about employment is the first important message of this video. The Fed is thinking long term. They're not saying, oh, we want a little bit more employment, a little less unemployment this month. They're thinking, what is the best strategy over the long haul to keep employment high, provide job opportunities for many, many Americans? And they have concluded that low and steady inflation is the best way to keep the labor market in good shape. By low and steady inflation, they mean 2%, but the particular number isn't important. But back 50 years ago, they were tolerating inflation that would go up, and then they would fight it, causing a recession, and then inflation would go back as they eased, and they are saying that is a bad policy. Low and steady inflation means fewer recessions, a smoother economy, and there's also evidence that the path of the economy over the long haul is a little bit stronger if we keep the business cycle tamed, which means keeping inflation low and steady. So that is their long view on employment. The second important thing that they take into consideration is the time lags of monetary policy. Monetary policy is changing interest rates mostly and some other tools that they have. The time lag is such that what they do today will affect employment over 6 to 12 months from now. It will affect inflation with an even longer time lag, more like 1 to 2 years. So the Fed has to be conscious of that. Well, with that framework, let's talk about where we are right now. Inflation has come down. Using the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, we had gotten as high as 7%, most recently down to 2.7%. That's a big improvement, but it's not there. And the last percentage point, or 0.7 of a percentage point, has been a challenge to come. So that's part of where we are now. On the employment side, we've added jobs in the total economy every month this year, but there are some small signals of softening there. There are fewer job openings at companies looking to hire. And because there are fewer job openings, fewer employees are voluntarily quitting. They usually quit either to retire or to take another job. There's less quitting going on. So these things are not terrible in and of themselves, but they lead us to think maybe the employment market is slackening. I want to talk about the argument that they should be cutting interest rates right now. That is not the Fed's own conclusion, but we need to consider that before we talk about why they did what they did. The argument for cutting interest rates has two parts. First of all, the time lags mean that there is more inflation improvement likely to come. So the Fed has kept interest rates at what they call a restrictive level. That means it should slow down the economy, and it takes a long time. That means that we still have calming effects on inflation in the pipeline. It's almost baked in the cake, the argument goes, that we will get lower inflation soon, so the Fed could go ahead and ease. And those signs that labor demand is slackening a little bit mean that we should take action now before it becomes a problem, because it will be some months, maybe up to a year, before the Fed's action takes effect, and by then we're going to need it. So there is, I think, a legitimate argument that the Fed should be cutting interest rates now. They didn't do it, and that's because the arguments for keeping interest rates level have won the day. Those are 2 points. First of all, the Federal Reserve recognizes that their own inflation forecasting computer models are not doing a good job, have not done a good job. And that is not just the Fed pointing a finger at itself. They also look at private sector economists such as me. They look at Wall Street forecasts, and they say nobody is very good at forecasting inflation. So nobody is very good at forecasting inflation means that the Fed has done something unusual. They're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and they have taken on something that nobody else in Washington seems to take on. The Fed has taken on humility. Humility. They don't really understand, and they recognize that. So given their humble approach to their economic forecasts, they have taken, and this is the second point for the keeping interest rates unchanged, they have taken what they call a risk management perspective. I'll talk about it from the Fed's viewpoint, but if you are running a business, you do this risk management perspective all the time. You have some decisions where you're uncertain what is the right decision or what is the right magnitude of the decision. How much to spend over here, how much to cut over there. And what business leaders do is they say, well, what is the pain? What is the cost if I err in one direction? What's the cost if I err in the other direction? So the Fed is doing that, and they're saying, what if we keep interest rates too high too long? What is the pain? The pain is unemployment rate goes up. There are fewer job opportunities for those people who want to work, but that would be a small and temporary pain. Then they say, what if we cut interest rates too soon? What's the cost there? In that case, inflation does not come down to the target. And this is critical to the Fed's thinking, people get expectations of inflation embedded in their behavior. So those are people as consumers, as workers, as business leaders, and they start thinking, oh, we're going to have inflation. We need to take that into account. And by taking inflation into account, we make it harder to ever bring inflation down, which means a more pronounced business cycle when we do. So that's what the Fed is thinking. That's their structure of thinking. What does that mean for the world going forward from June 2024? It means that the Fed is going to, I think, ease eventually, but they're going to do it in small steps. Most recently, they're thinking 1 or possibly 2 cuts in interest rates of a 1/4 point each, not a big deal. And then next year, 2025, maybe 2 or 3 cuts. I'm with that thinking. I'm actually with 2 small cuts this year, 3 next year. But the important point for you business leaders is the Fed is going to move slowly and very gradually. So if you're somebody in, say, real estate, and you're thinking that your business would be a lot better off if they would cut interest rates a lot, I'm afraid that's not happening because of the Fed's goals and the way they think of the structure of the economy and the time lags involved. It's going to be a slow, gradual process to bring interest rates down. I'm Dr. Bill Connerly. I connect the dots between the economy and business. If you like this video, you may want my monthly newsletter available at no charge. It's in graphical format, and you can hit the QR code if you'd like to look at it and then subscribe.